know what this brick reminds me of? The kind of person a lot of us know, or even have been ourselves. You look up to all the big guys with awe. The girls don't notice you. You're the typical kid who's always the last one chosen on the baseball team and then sent to the right field. No standout in the crowd, at least not for anything good. That's what this brick reminds me of. Stand back from a brick wall, and one brick is pretty insignificant. You hardly notice one from the other. You can feel like someone in a corner, hidden away, never noticed by anybody. But that's one side of the story. Every single brick in a wall is important. Take one out, and there's a hole. Take several of them out, and the wall's in danger of collapsing. You can look at it that way too. A lot of care and attention goes into the making of a brick. Let's take a tour of a place where they make them, and you'll see what I mean.
This is the story of a brick. It's made with tiny grains of sand, like the billions you see lying on the beach. Into the bin. And into the mixer, where the sand is smothered in cement powder and drowned in water. Here comes the tough part. Into the mold, strong and very rigid. The mold determines what the brick is going to look like when it's done. The shake-up. And now the pressure is on. Tons of it. Out of the forms. Time to dry. And the finished product. But there's a part of brick making that we haven't shown yet. There are minds who plan and control what is going to happen. An engineer draws up the design. A workman carefully controls the process. The machines have been made by the owner to put on the pressure. And the result? Beautiful. Like God who made us. He too has a design. He molds each of us, puts pressure on us at just the right time, all with a purpose to make us useful for himself, to be a part of something beautiful he's building. The best thing that could happen to us. Being part of his design.
Ah, that makes me feel special already. When we come back after this break, we'll talk about peer pressure. You remember the feelings as though it were yesterday. There was a definite structure in school. There were the leader types and the followers. Maybe you were a follower, and nothing felt worse than being left out. That was the dangerous part, because when you saw that you might be left out of what everybody was doing, you tried extra hard to be accepted. Sometimes it happened without you really noticing what you were doing, and you did some dumb things. When you were younger, weekends could be the hardest. First, there were the overnights when you tented in each other's backyards. Sometimes you'd sneak over to the park across the street and fool around on the swings in the moonlight for hours. And your parents thought you were tucked safely away in your sleeping bags. Then there were the video nights, usually on birthdays. At first, you'd watch Disney cartoons, but after a while, your friends didn't want to come if you didn't have stuff with violence in it. And you begged and begged for your mom to let you please choose the movies. It was a matter of life and death with your friends. As you got older, the decisions got harder and harder to make. You had to decide whether you really wanted to do all the stuff the in crowd was doing at parties on weekends, or even just whether you should be there in the first place.
Hey, Darlene, are you going to Sally's party?
I don't know yet, maybe.
It should be great.
What's all happening?
Well, there'll be lots of food. John and Frank are bringing the videos. George, Pete, and Ed are coming.
Are Pat and Chris gonna be there?
I'm not sure. Oh, yeah, they'll be there.
Oh.
Why? What's wrong with them?
Well, they're a bit too wild for me. You know, drinking underage. I hear they're into heavier stuff.
Heavier stuff? Like what?
Well, like drugs.
Drugs? But that doesn't mean that there'll be any at the party.
No, but I'd feel uncomfortable just thinking that there might be.
Darlene, you're too sensitive. Don't worry about things that might not be.
Is there gonna be alcohol?
What if there is?
Well, I'd like to know ahead of time.
What's the big deal?
For one thing, it's illegal.
So, who's gonna get caught?
So there will be alcohol.
I didn't say that.
But you implied it.
Okay, so there might be a little bit of alcohol. Sally said you'd raise a fuss.
She did?
Yeah. She said you're religious and that your parents were very strict about what happens to parties that you go to.
Well, the thing about drugs and alcohol at Sally's party are my own idea. I've thought about what they can lead to, and it seems pretty scary to me.
Like I say, you're too sensitive, Darlene. It's not one person's problem, it's everybody's problem, and everybody has to face it.
Well, is everybody right, though? A lot of people can be on the wrong track together.
Yeah, all I can say is it gets to be very lonely doing all these right things, even if it is better than what everybody else is doing.
Well, I know what you mean, but it's not worth it in the end. You just have to look ahead.
Yeah. If only there were more people doing the right things, it wouldn't be so lonely.
Yeah, you're right.
Scared and tattered by all of my problems, searching for answers, my heart's open wide. The choices we make, they fix our future. How can we know what's wrong or right? Talk to God, He's there to listen. Walk with Jesus, He'll show you the way. He'll show you the way. He'll show you the way.
We'll listen in on some high school students to see how they cope with pressure from their friends right after this break. One of the things I found to be important was to have friends I could really be myself with, and friends I could trust. People I didn't always have to prove myself with. I know that's when we do some of the dumbest things of our lives, when we're insecure and want to impress people. Like driving a bike up on the scaffolding at a construction site on a dare and going off the plank and ending up in emergency with a concussion. You can sometimes spare yourself the bother of experiences like that if you really feel safe with your friends.
I think friends put you through a lot of peer pressure because they do things that you probably know aren't right, but in order to stay friends with them, you have to do them. Sort of friends, like with quotation marks around, they're not really your friends, but you try to be their friends by doing that. Like you do stuff that is wrong.
Like they're the popular people and the kind of like the leaders of the clique, and you want to get into that clique, and so you have to try to do what they want so that they'll let you in. So that's where a lot of pressure comes. Gets me by clothes, like some of the clothes that I'd like to wear, if I wore them to school, people would laugh me right out of the school, and so I wear more clothes like everybody else does. And
drugs and smoking and drinking are a lot of what peer pressure is all about for teenagers, I think. For instance, people who take drugs, like, they think, well, they might as well just live one day at a time and get good out of it now, and like they don't even think of what's going to happen to them later. Like their children might be deformed or something, or they might lose their mind in a way, you know, and stuff like that. So they just think of like having a good time now.
I know someone who really wants to be in the in-group, and so she listens to all the same music they listen to and reads the same magazines and stuff just so that she get into the in-group. She wears the same perfume as them and all that, and it's just, she should be her own person.
A loser could be someone, like he goes to a different school or she goes to a new school and sort of just doesn't fit with any crowd or something.
Sometimes they're someone who's smarter than everybody, like too smart almost. And they listen to different music than other people and
are losers. Like there's this one person in school who is a bit slow or something, and they like criticize her in some ways, and I try like not to criticize her and like to defend myself, but they sort of accuse me of treating her like a baby or something. And sometimes I sort of get into talking bad things about her too, like something that it's not really that much of a big deal, but that's one ways that peer pressure gets me. You either were brought up in a non-intelligent home or were just not around people who were intelligent or something. You can't help that, so just be your own self, and if people can't accept you the way they are, well then heck with them, like it's their problem. And like even though you don't have friends, rather be yourself and feel good about yourself than try to change and like maybe even and risk the chance of becoming even a worse loser.
If you're being your own person, then you should be able to feel good about yourself because that's how you want to be. So then there can't be a whole lot like that. You shouldn't have to want to change and not feel good about yourself.
Yeah, I think that's true because like if you don't fit with other people, like don't fit with the crowd, do what you do best, like figure out some hobby that you'd be good at, like for instance music or sports, or even like working computers or something, or reading. Work with what you do best, and that will usually fill up your time.
My advice to parents who would have a kid who's maybe not in the in crowd or is kind of like a loser, that they should just support that person and they should help them to make the best of themselves. If they really like sports, then the parents shouldn't complain if they're at school, after school all the time at sports practices. They should just be glad that their son or daughter is enjoying themselves.
The parents should be behind this child 100% and support them because then the child will feel confident and eventually he might even get accepted and feel more confident about themselves and think of themselves as a better person.
Yeah, and sometimes you think that you want to do something with your friends and you think it's fine and you think that there's nothing really wrong with it, but your parents don't agree with you and you have to decide whether you should stand up for what you believe or obey your parents. And sometimes it really pulls you apart because you don't know whether you should obey your parents like the Bible says you should, or stay true to what you believe.
And you want to have friends, so you usually pick what the friends do, not what your parents want you to do, or what's right. Well, I think Christianity helps with peer pressure in a way that, well, if someone asks you to do something that you know is wrong, you think of, well, what would Jesus do in my case? And if Jesus would be right beside me, would he be proud of what I was doing?
Basically, the way I make myself feel at ease when being under pressure is I always think of Jesus, that he was never really accepted into a popular crowd or anything. He was usually put down more than what he should have been. He was never accepted. So I figured, well, if he wasn't accepted, why should I have to be accepted and try to be more like him?
Well, if you think like, oh, well, I might as well do this because Jesus will forgive me anyway, like that's a bad attitude. You should not do that. But if you sort of get sucked in, sort of by accident in a way, say you've smoked or you've drank like to the capacity that you became drunk or something, later on you think of what you did and you're really, really sorry, like truly sorry. Then you ask for forgiveness and he will forgive you.
I guess I was fortunate. I had parents who tried hard to understand. They didn't always. Sometimes we had some royal arguments. But most of the time, I could talk to them. That really helped. I'll be back with more after this break. This program is called The Third Story. The reason for that is because there are at least 3 stories. Yours, mine, and the most important one, God's story. We're going to hear one of those now. It's from God's book, the Bible. You've heard about Daniel being thrown into the lion's den? Well, this is the same Daniel. He faced a lot of peer pressure, and sometimes not giving in almost killed him.
Daniel was a man who lived many years ago in Bible times. Because of the many experiences he had, you could say that he was kind of an authority on peer pressure. His tests began for him when he was whisked away from his home by marauders who conquered his Jewish homeland and took good-looking teenagers like him away to make slaves out of them. One of the first things his captors did to Daniel was to try to make him forget his background. They changed things like his friends, his eating habits, and his language. But Daniel, even as a teenager, was a person who followed the ways of God very carefully. There were things he wouldn't give up no matter how many people pressured him. Like his food, for instance. He made up his mind not to eat the rich food the Babylonian king provided for him. Instead, he was determined to stick with healthy vegetables. He begged his supervisors to give him a break. Reluctantly, they tested his diet on him for 10 days, and he was right. At the end of the test period, he looked healthier than any of the fellas eating the king's food. He did what he was convinced was right, what God wanted him to do. One day, the government made a law forbidding people to ask a favor from anyone, God or man, other than the king. Violators would be put to death. Even the threat of death didn't stop Daniel from doing what he knew was right. His regular practice at home was to kneel down in front of his upstairs window and to pray to God 3 times a day. He continued doing this just as he always had before the law was made. For this, the Babylonians threw him into the lion's den and left him to die. And he was prepared to die. But God saved him by closing the mouths of the lions. God was able to use Daniel, this man of conviction, in unusual ways. One day his boss, Belshazzar the king, invited 1,000 of his officers to a great feast where the wine flowed freely. Suddenly, in front of everybody, the fingers of a man's hand began writing on the wall in a strange language. The king himself saw this. He turned white with fear and his knees knocked together. "Bring the magicians and astrologers," he screamed. "Whoever can read this message to me will receive a great reward." They tried nobly to find an interpreter, but everyone failed. The king grew more and more hysterical. His officers were shaken too. It was the queen who saved the day, she remembered Daniel. She recalled the wisdom that God had given him for times just such as this. Daniel was rushed in. The reward was offered to him too. "Keep your gifts," he told the king. "The message isn't good for you." Before interpreting the message, Daniel reminded Belshazzar that he was not a humble king. He had openly defied the Lord of heaven. "You are praising the gods of silver, gold, iron, wood, and have ignored the God of heaven who gives you the breath of life and controls your destiny. God sent those fingers to give you this message. The days of your reign are numbered and they are ended. You have been weighed in God's balances and have failed the test. Your kingdom will be divided and given to others." Daniel was given the reward the king promised, but it didn't matter much. That very night, an invading king killed Belshazzar and took over the kingdom for himself. As for Daniel, he was spared and was given a major position in the new administration. Until his death, he remained faithful to God and never let others pressure him into doing what was wrong.
Hi, we'd love to hear from you at The Third Story. We'd like to know a little bit about you, who you are, and what you think about some of the things you've seen on the program. When you write to us, we'll send you a survival kit. It's free of charge. In it, you'll find a cartoon book with some stories from the programs, a book from the Bible, some cards you can send to your friends, and a colorful poster with some verses to think about. When you write to us, send your letter to The Third Story, Box 2, Station F, Winnipeg, Manitoba. That's The Third Story, Box 2, Station F, Winnipeg, Manitoba. We hope to hear from you real soon.
Every brick in a wall makes a difference. People are important too. God made us, and He has something important for each one of us to do. We can lose a lot of our special opportunities by going along with everybody else, or we can follow God and His ways and come out with the best, the wonderful things God intended for us in the first place. Thanks for watching. Look for us again next week.
There is a war on. Inside some people there is a conflict, and it's killing their souls. There is a battle of fear and frustration, a brokenness that needs to be made whole. They need a peacemaker with a loving hand. Yes, a peacemaker who will show them God's plan. Oh, a peacemaker who will understand and help them be healthy again. There is rebellion inside some people, a fight against God and doing His will. There's revolution to prove you're somebody, a restlessness that needs to be made still. They need a peacemaker with a loving hand. Yes, a peacemaker who will show them God's plan. Oh, a peacemaker who will understand and help them be healthy again. There is a crisis inside some people, a confrontation.